Discover the amazing transformative power of Norse myths. 12 surprising tales that inspire change. As Emma sifted through the clutter in her grandfather's attic, a curious book caught her attention, worn and dusty, but brimming with Norse myths that told of gods and heroes overcoming tremendous odds. She ran her fingers over the leather cover, the swirling designs igniting a flicker of hope amid her chaotic life as a single mother. At 33, burdened by the weight of raising 2 children on a part-time income, she often felt lost in her dreams of becoming a high school history teacher. With every story she read aloud to her kids, the echoes of epic struggles resonated with her own daunting journey of prejudice and ambition. Each day drained her as she balanced late-night shifts with homework help, while the oppressive financial strain loomed. Would she ever find her place in the classroom, pouring inspiration into her students the way that ancient wisdom poured into her heart? The constant exhaustion threatened to silence the stories within her. But within, Emma wrestled with conflicting emotions. Would they take flight, or remain trapped beneath crushing reality? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Returning to the dusty pages, Emma imagined invoking the fierce spirits of the Norse gods, sharing these tales of courage with her students. Yet, the potential of that idea filled her with anxiety. Would she be labeled too unorthodox? The thought of being judged by the disapproving school board member gripped her with unease. What if she was seen as an inadequate teacher, trying to straddle the line between relevance and tradition? The internal tug-of-war grew more violent with each passing moment. Days flowed into sleepless nights, her heart racing as she envisioned the classroom atmosphere shifting. Students listening intently, nodding as they began to understand the parallels between ancient heroism and their own lives. Yet, a creeping fear whispered that she might lose control of the narrative. Could a passionate approach be deemed irresponsible? The institutional pressure stifled her resolve, squeezing the breath from her thoughts, leaving her in an agonizing dilemma. As presentation day crept closer, it was less about history and more about the future, her future and the futures of her students. Emma grappled with the prospect of failure, a reality she had navigated far too often as a working mother. Would their excitement turn into mockery? Or worse, would she convince herself that she couldn't withstand the scrutiny? The stakes couldn't be higher. Before she knew it, her heart raced with desperation as she faced the greatest defining moment of her budding career. Time seemed to clutch at her like a vice, squeezing tighter with each tick of the clock. Were the tales of gods and bravery really enough to silence the naysayers? Could she inspire resilience even at the risk of being crushed beneath tradition? Pausing in the attic, she stared at the collection of mythic tales, realizing that waiting for approval might mean losing a part of herself. Those stories weren't just words. They were the very fabric of her being, the battle cries of heroes. But would she dare to be one herself? The uncertainty gnawed at her insides. Would her desperate fight for authenticity shine through? The air around her felt charged. The boundaries of hope and despair blurred as she questioned everything, her heart heavy with the burden of choice. The days dwindled down to one before the presentation, and with each sunrise, Emma felt the weight of invisible hands tightening around her chest. She wandered around the attic almost aimlessly, her mind replaying the fears she owned like a favorite, yet outgrown jacket. The book lay open on the table, words spilling from yellowed pages, weaving tales that spurred the bravest to ascend to their full potential. Yet something within her felt painfully small, unable to echo the same valor. Emma's children, oblivious to their mother's turmoil, would occasionally scurry up to her with their own ambitions: an astronaut, a veterinarian. Their dreams appeared to her like soaring kites, while hers felt tethered to the ground. "Mom, what's wrong?" her daughter had asked last night, the questioning gaze wide and innocent. Emma had brushed it off with a smile, but the truth throbbed beneath that surface, a wound hard to disguise. Even as she prepped for the presentation, glancing over her meticulously crafted notes. Doubts clawed at her insides. What if her students could sense her hesitance? What if they perceived her passion as a frantic grasp at authority? Yet, the spirit of the Vikings resonated within her, urging her to brave the waves that had always terrified her. She remembered a story, one of Odin, who faced countless trials to gain wisdom. How could she teach them that lesson if she couldn't embody it herself? Come the sunlit morning of the presentation, Emma stood before her mirror, examining her reflection. She straightened her spine, inhaled deeply, embracing the resolve clawing for birth inside her. She knew she had to move beyond the timid shell created by years of self-doubt. This was not merely a class. It was a chance to share her vision, her voice, breathing life into history. Arriving at the school, her heart pulsated to a frantic beat. Students shuffled around, laughter pealing through the halls like arrows loosed from a bow, and for the first time, she recognized the truth. They felt no weight, no looming judgment, only the untainted thrill of discovery. No more would she let external fears define her. It was time to challenge the very narrative she feared most. As she entered the classroom, the air felt electric, her students' eyes bright with curiosity. The familiar anxiety threatened to bubble back to the surface, but she held her ground. Today we're going to explore heroes, she began, casting glances to gauge their engagement. Not just those from history, but the heroes within each of you. With each story she shared Thor's uncontestable strength. Loki's cunning instructions transformed into thrilling explorations of character and conflict. Emma encouraged them to question, to draw out parallels, to engage in dialogue more than monologue. The fear of ridicule dissipated as the walls she built around her voice began to crumble. Suddenly, a small but brave hand rose. Miss Turner, but what if we're afraid? What if we can't be brave like them? Emma paused, an unexpected fierce clarity crystallizing in her mind. What if courage isn't about being unafraid, but about acting despite that fear? Her own vulnerability spilled across the room, allowing the students to mirror her anxiety and curiosity back to her. In that moment, their questions transformed into the risks she might have avoided, leading her into uncharted territories of creativity. The skepticism within her began to fade, replaced by an invigorating sense of determination. She realized that shedding the layers of expectation released more than just her voice. It ignited passions she thought had dwindled. They were in this together, sharing fears, laughter, and courage. But as the last bell rang and the students filed out, an unnamed weight returned. The presentation had not silenced her doubts completely. Instead, it opened wider avenues of reflection. Emma knew the path of authenticity was fraught with uncertainties. Yet with those uncertainties came the promise of growth. As she lingered in the empty classroom, a sense of unease settled within her again. What new challenges might arise following this bold step? What consequences could this authentic self-assertion yield in the face of potential backlash from the administration? Standing alone, a sinking feeling crept in again. She had confronted one giant, but felt another rising within the shadows. She realized that perhaps her struggles were just beginning. Would she summon the strength to continue fighting for her vision, even if it meant facing more disapproval? With the book still open on her desk, words that once offered solace now seemed to echo with foreboding. The question reverberated in her mind. Could she withstand the greater battles awaiting her? In the following days, Emma found herself entangled in a whirlwind of thoughts that spiraled from the aftermath of her presentation. She replayed moments in her mind. The laughter, the curiosity, the students leaning forward on their desks, eager for the next tale to unfold. Yet, alongside the exhilaration, seeds of doubt began to take root once more. What if those moments were fleeting, mere flickers of interest rather than genuine engagement? Returning home, Emma welcomed the warmth of her children's laughter, a comforting sound against the chill of uncertainty following her experience. Still, she felt the walls of her world constricting once more. The allure of the attic called to her, the dusty pile of stories whispering of promise and possibility. But rather than retreating into that confined space, she decided to step boldly into the unknown of her own life, a life that extended beyond the roles of mother and teacher, into the realm of her own aspirations. The next day at school, she approached the faculty lounge with a new resolve. Conversations amongst colleagues buzzed with topics she had long observed from the sidelines, as whispers of new programs and innovative teaching methods swirled in the air. It was unfamiliar territory. Emma hesitated briefly, but as she caught sight of a discussion focused on integrating mythology into the current curriculum, empowerment surged within her. Perhaps her passion for Norse tales could forge connections that transcended the boundaries of her classroom. With a deep breath, Emma stepped forward. "I have an idea," she began, the phrasing surprising even herself. "What if we used mythology not just as a subject, but as a framework for character building? We could explore how these ancient stories convey modern values." A few heads turned, interest piqued, while several colleagues exchanged skeptical glances. Emma felt the weight of their scrutiny, yet this time she stood firm, an unexpected flame igniting within her. What she proposed was already becoming a synthesis of her experiences, both the fear and the resolution, and it resonated with purposes beyond mere lesson plans. This was about crafting a narrative that encompassed their struggles and triumphs within the learning environment. One teacher raised an eyebrow. "Interesting concept, Emma, but how viable is it? You'll need to demonstrate real applications before the administration buys into this." Her immediate instinct was to retreat, but recalling her students' sincere queries about fear, she realized this was a direct challenge to her newfound voice. "I'll draft a plan and present it next week," she asserted, fighting the tremor in her tone. The response wasn't immediate applause nor a wave of agreement, but she sensed a ripple of respect in their nods, however tentative. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. She returned to her classroom, heart racing. The initial excitement surged, quickly battled by what-ifs. What did she know about designing educational programs? Could she indeed channel her passion into something tangible? Over the next few days, Emma spent hours researching best practices, reaching out to educators who had trodden similar paths. The deeper she delved, the more hidden competencies she unearthed, skills that had lain dormant amidst years of self-doubt. A persistent thought echoed. Perhaps part of her journey was not just about claiming space for her voice, but about empowering others to do the same. As her plan took shape, she faced the reality of needing support from others, which meant confronting her fear of rejection. Would other teachers rally behind this initiative, or would they question her credentials once again? The very notion churned nerves deep within. One evening, under the glow of an antique lamp, Emma sketched out her proposal. The connections between mythology and personal growth danced in her mind like an ancient fire coming to life. Just as she began to feel untethered from doubt, a new anxiety surfaced. What if her ideas were met with more than just skepticism? What if the administration outright dismissed her contributions? At that moment, she noticed her children watching her, absorbed in their own imaginative play. Their uninhibited exploration stirred a revelation. There would always be hurdles, but the act of striving to share her vision was itself a victory worth the risk. Filling her lungs full of air, she penned her plan with fervor. Fueled by the prospect of igniting change, she closed her notebook. Uncertainty began to ripple once more through her mind. Would she be able to defend her ideas against potential backlash? What if this new venture turned into a fraught battlefield rather than the collaborative endeavor she envisioned? Determined yet anxious, she began to draft her presentation. In the silence, one final confrontation echoed in her heart. Was she truly ready to face any backlash that the administration might levy against her? Could she hold her ground and still come out of this process unscathed? Emma took a deep breath, knowing the forthcoming days would test her resolve in ways she hadn't imagined. The moment for reckoning was rapidly approaching, and with it, a pivotal opportunity for transformation awaited. Would she rise to meet it, or would she find herself retreating once more into the shadows of doubt? Emma spent the next few days enveloped in a cocoon of planning and preparation. Her proposal took on a life of its own, a narrative crafted, not just from ancient tales, but from the deepest corners of her soul, where vulnerability and courage intertwined. As she typed away, symbols of ancient valor filled the screen beside her, transforming mythology from merely a subject into a vessel for resilience and character development. Each story became a lesson in navigating the complexities of modern existence, offering wisdom that could illuminate her students' often confusing lives. Despite her feverish pacing on the keyboard, self-doubt lingered. Could these stories really resonate with her students? Would they see beyond the archaic language and surreal settings to grasp the relevant lessons buried underneath? Questions haunted her as much as the dusty tales she would often evade in the attic. Emma sought to expand her research beyond just the tales themselves. She looked into contemporary educational philosophies, discovering various methods for integrating storytelling into lesson plans. The more she unearthed, the clearer her vision became. She was not just imparting knowledge. She was inviting her students into a world where they could forge their own identities through these narratives. As a metaphorical tapestry gradually wove itself before her, she realized her task was more than designing a lesson plan. It was about creating connections among students who might feel adrift, bridging their realities with the enriching lore of Norse mythology. She envisioned them embodying those timeless heroes, possibly even seeing facets of themselves in characters like Thor, whose strength was matched only by his enduring semblance of humanity amidst his flaws. But then a startling truth hit her. Was she, herself, ready to embody the qualities she hoped to instill in others? Then came the day of her presentation. Emma arrived early, a whirlwind of anxious energy, as she reviewed her notes and practiced her delivery in hushed whispers. The faculty room buzzed with chatter, but she felt a thick wall of isolation surround her, shielding her from their discussions and animated voices. As teachers assembled for the meeting, her worry festered. What if the courage she sought to cultivate had no grounding in her own reality? Would she crumble under their critiques? As her turn approached, Emma caught sight of the administrator who had the final say over curriculum changes, Mrs. Patterson, an imposing figure with an impressive resume. It was then that the gravity of the moment synthesized fear and determination into a single rallying cry within her. She couldn't afford to falter. This was her opportunity to showcase not just her ideas but her dedication to education, mentorship, and transformation. With an inaudible prayer for strength, she stepped forward into the spotlight. Her voice trembled initially, a reflection of her unease, but as she delved into the proposal, Emma became captivated by the mission. She articulated how mythology could humanize morality, mold character, and inspire emotional development in a manner that illustrated both the ancient wisdom and contemporary relevance. Her passion surged, and with every sentence, she felt a burgeoning unity with her colleagues, as if they too were ready to embrace this journey. But then, midway through, a familiar voice cut through her stream of consciousness. "That sounds nice, Emma," Mrs. Patterson interrupted. "But our current curriculum is already packed. We need proven results before we change our approach." The specter of self-doubt loomed as sharp as ever, but rather than shrink back, a newfound resolve sparked in Emma's chest. With all due respect, she replied, "Isn't part of our responsibility to challenge the status quo and explore innovative pathways? These stories equip our students with the framework to handle life's complexities, just as they have for generations." An uncomfortable silence blanketed the room. Breaths were held. Minds were racing as Emma's challenging tone reverberated. In that moment, confrontation loomed, the kind that rattled the facade of complacency among her peers, and she sensed a shift in the atmosphere. As they absorbed her words, the question echoed in her mind. Could she sustain this courage in the face of institutional resistance? Would her voice remain steady, even as she ventured deeper into uncharted waters? With her heart racing, she scanned the faces of her colleagues, aware that the road ahead was fraught with potential apprehension and challenges beyond her current imagination. The stakes had irrevocably escalated, and the risk of failure loomed larger than ever. As the meeting adjourned, Emma felt a wave crash over her, a mixture of relief, fear, and an exhilarating sense of purpose. She had pushed against the current, but would that be enough to forge a new path for both herself and her students? The answers lay ahead unwritten, waiting for her to discover them. But as she exited the room, she couldn't shake the lingering apprehension. What if the very heart of this proposal wasn't just about altering a curriculum, but about redefining who she was in this world? Emma left the faculty room with a blend of exhilaration and uncertainty. The adrenaline still coursed through her veins as she walked down the dimly lit hallway, her mind racing with implications of her confrontation. Each step was a mix of triumph, having asserted her vision, and dread at the thought of potential repercussions. In the solitude of her classroom, she sat before her computer, the blank screen mocking her with the weight of her unfulfilled aspirations. As the sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes in its golden glow, Emma felt engulfed by a familiar disquiet. Was she brave enough to face the challenges ahead? Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Instead of typing, she leaned back in her chair, letting her gaze wander around the room. Posters of literary figures adorned the walls, while stacks of books lined the shelves. The room was a sanctuary, yet it felt constricting. What if she was meant for more than this? As she contemplated her next steps, she remembered the stories of Norse gods, their struggles and victories, Thor battling giants and Loki weaving chaos. Each tale mirrored trials in her own life. In those moments of chaos, she found herself confronting fears. Might others, too, find their strength through these narratives? But then doubt clouded her clarity. Could she transform their lives solely through ancient myths? Emma's stomach twisted at the thought. A voice inside whispered that she needed tangible evidence, metrics, data, success stories to provide a shield against potential criticism. Yet every time she reached for that security blanket, she felt the echoes of her proposals resonate. The transformational journey was about emotional connection and personal growth, not just facts and figures. Frustrated, she withdrew to the back of her desk and pulled out a notebook, furiously jotting down ideas. In bold letters, she wrote innovation versus tradition. This dilemma seemed to pulse in her chest, vibrating with each heartbeat. Wasn't innovation itself the essence of education? If students didn't learn to adapt and create a narrative of their own, would they ever find true purpose? The next few days ushered in a kaleidoscope of lessons to tackle her fears. Emma immersed herself in workshops on creative teaching methods, honing her abilities to weave storytelling into academic engagement. She empowered herself with knowledge she could use to fortify her arguments against the staunch traditionalists, including Mrs. Patterson. As she practiced her new teaching strategies on her students, an unexpected transformation unfolded. They embraced the change, sharing their interpretations of the stories with open minds. Each discussion fueled Emma's confidence. Maybe she had tapped into something vital, a path that could empower her students to see themselves as heroes in their own lives. Yet, with each victory, the shadow of her recent institutional challenge lingered, whispering risks of failure. One Friday afternoon, as Emma wrapped up her lessons, a student named Jake approached her desk hesitantly. "Miss Taylor, I really loved what we did this week," he began, excitement threading through his anxiousness. "Can we do more stories like that? I feel different, like I can actually do something." The sincerity in his eyes ignited a deeper resolve within Emma, reminding her why she had pursued this path in the first place. But just as quickly, reality settled in again. How could she be sure that these fleeting victories would last? What would happen when faced with more opposition or criticism? Did she have the endurance to continue this fight, knowing the system could easily stifle her vision? Emma's heart raced as she recognized the core of her struggle, not just with the institution, but with her unraveling self-doubt. The unease twisted within, questioning whether she belonged in this courageous arena she had stepped into. As she closed that Friday evening, a sense of determination began to form. No matter the outcome, she resolved to continue. She wouldn't be just a voice among many. She would lead with conviction, pioneering the changes she believed were necessary. Deep down, she understood. To transform others, she would first need to confront her own fears and limitations and emerge stronger from the experience. With a final breath of conviction, she opened her notebook, scrawling biting words. "Redefining my narrative, forging my path." As she stepped into the weekend with an invigorated spirit, a single thought circled her mind like the lingering echo of an ancient tale. Was she ready to face not only the critics but also the parts of herself that held her back? What new narratives awaited her beyond the horizon? Emma awoke on Saturday to a soft glow filtering through her window, the kind of light that beckoned with promise. With her heart still echoing with Jacob's words from the day before, she felt a mix of excitement and trepidation as she sipped her coffee, pondering how to channel this new resolve into her teaching. It wasn't enough to simply hold on to fleeting moments of inspiration. She needed to cultivate a lasting impact. She envisioned her classroom, a vibrant space alive with the stories of old. But how could she bridge the gap between ancient myths and her students' modern challenges? This question spun in her mind as she grabbed a notebook and strolled to the nearby park, eager to jot down ideas in a fresh atmosphere. The sun warmed her skin as she settled beneath a large oak tree, its leaves rustling softly. In her notes, she outlined the transformative elements of each Norse myth. She wasn't just documenting the stories. She was searching for the connections to contemporary issues. How could Thor's bravery in battle resonate with a student's struggle against self-doubt? How might Loki's cunning approach inspire resilience and resourcefulness when faced with academic challenges? As she wrote, it became clear that for every myth, there was a moral lesson relevant to her students' lives. Yet, a whisper of doubt crept in. Was she truly qualified to draw these parallels? What if she misinterpreted the tales? "Remember your purpose," she whispered to herself, writing down the words of empowerment they held. This was about more than accuracy. It was about fostering a connection that made learning meaningful. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs, igniting her resolve. By the end of the day, her notebook brimmed with ideas for lessons that intertwined personal narratives with the legendary tales. She crafted activities where students could retell their life stories through the lens of their favorite mythological figures, fostering both creativity and confidence. This innovative approach could transform her classroom into a sanctuary for exploration, where every student could reclaim their narrative. Yet, as the sun dipped below the horizon, shadows of impending criticism loomed once again. What if Mrs. Patterson dismissed her plans as frivolous? What if the administration didn't see the value in her unconventional methods? Emma clenched her fists, willing herself to confront those fears. If anything, she was emboldened by every small success she had achieved with her students. As she prepared for the upcoming week, she reminded herself of the importance of vulnerability. She would take risks, knowing that growth could only happen outside her comfort zone. The next day, she set out to gather feedback from her students about her new ideas. She scheduled an informal session, inviting them into a dialogue about their learning experiences. As they discussed their hopes and apprehensions, she sensed their investment in the lesson plans. Their enthusiasm buoyed her spirit and reinforced her convictions. But just as a wave of hope surged within her, a message pinged on her phone. It was from an anonymous account, sharing a critical blog post on her teaching methods that had gained traction among her colleagues. The words struck with a jarring clarity. Emma Taylor's misguided attempts to revolutionize learning through myths are merely distractions from educational rigor. The exhilaration from the day before faded instantly, leaving her breathless. How could she have misjudged the environment she worked in? Was she truly unqualified for the change she wished to lead? She grappled with the impulse to respond immediately, but instead, she paused, feeling the weight of her reality settle around her. This twist took her by surprise, but perhaps it wasn't just about her teaching. It struck at the very core of her identity. Did she even have what it takes to challenge not only the institution but also herself? As she closed her laptop, a new sense of purpose ignited within her. The moment had come to face not only the critics but the deep-seated doubts that threatened to unravel everything she had fought for. Before she could lose momentum again, she wrote a single phrase in her notebook, embracing the battle within. Standing at the threshold of her journey, she knew one thing. The fight for change was only beginning, and the stakes were higher than ever. Would she emerge as the champion of her narrative or succumb to the shadows of her insecurities? Determined to confront her fears head-on, Emma awoke on Monday morning with a newfound clarity. The jarring words from the anonymous blog post nagged at her as she prepared for the day. A familiar mix of determination and anxiety coursed through her veins. With each sip of her coffee, she resolved to transform her critics into a source of momentum rather than a weight around her neck. As she stepped into her classroom, she was struck by the sight of her students. Their youthful faces brimmed with a blend of anticipation and skepticism, a mirror to her own inner landscape. She didn't want to sidestep the challenges they faced. She wanted to embrace them, to build a bridge from the ancient world to their present lives. Heart racing, she settled at the front of the class and took a deep breath. "Today, we're going to dive into the world of Norse myths," she announced, her voice steady. "But we won't just be talking about gods and giants. We'll be unveiling their relevance to our struggles and triumphs." The silence that followed was heavy. She could almost hear the gears turning in their minds. Would they open up to this unconventional approach? As she began her lesson on Thor, she wove contemporary stories into the fabric of the ancient narrative. "How does Thor's courage relate to facing a bully?" she posed, looking into the eyes of her students for engagement. Their responses began tentatively, and it filled Emma with hope. One student mentioned battling anxiety during tests, paralleling it with Thor's fearlessness despite the daunting foes he faced. Emma could feel the momentum building, not just in ideas but in collective energy. She leaned into this by asking them to share their life experiences, framing it through the heroic lenses of mythology. In that moment, the walls around her began to dissolve, the lines between teacher and student blurred, allowing for a powerful exchange. But just as exhilaration surged through her, Emma couldn't shake the lingering weight of the previous night's critique. What if they didn't see the world of myths as vital, or worse, what if they ridiculed her attempts as naive? Determined to push these doubts aside, she launched into a classroom activity that encouraged creativity. Students would write and perform their own mythological story with personal twists. Laughter and debates filled the room as they either crafted tales of adventure or wove their own trauma into the narratives. And it sparked something in Emma too. Yet, in the back of her mind, squirrels of doubt still scurried. As she moved among the groups, listening to their passionate discussions, a sliver of realization cut through her. The criticisms reflected their own insecurities about engaging in risk-taking. By the end of the session, they performed their stories, and the class erupted in applause, infused with enthusiasm and authenticity. Emma's heart swelled at their willingness to embrace her vision. But amidst the applause were scattered murmurs of discontent. Some students were uncomfortable with the entire exercise, citing lack of seriousness in their learning. That evening, sitting at her kitchen table overflowing with pages of stories filled with vibrant illustrations, she realized that this was merely another hurdle to address. With her heart racing, she tapped out a message on her computer. "Why are we afraid to harness creativity in education?" As she typed, she felt a ripple of conviction surge through her. This wasn't merely about her methods but rather an exploration of what education could entail. Her words responded to her critics while challenging her students to own their narratives. A confrontation transformed into a conversation. With renewed tenacity, Emma decided to compile their ideas into a presentation for the upcoming faculty meeting. She felt the thrill of vulnerability again, but this time, it was accompanied by clarity of purpose. Would she let fear halt her? No. The tension bubbled in her chest as she envisioned her next steps. Almost instinctively, she made a decision. She would present her lessons alongside the students' works, advocating for mythological narratives as tools of empowerment. As she scribbled her plan, the realization hit her: she wasn't just fighting for appreciation but redefining the very essence of education, pushing against the norms. It was war not against her critics, but against the fear of stagnation. What awaited her at the meeting? Would she find allies who understood her vision, or would she encounter more resistance that could deepen her doubts? Emma could feel a thick cloud of uncertainty hover over her as she entered the faculty meeting room the next day. The air was charged with murmured conversations, and she could spot a few colleagues who wore skeptical expressions. She had spent hours perfecting her presentation, embedding not just her lesson ideas but the very heart of her newfound philosophy on education. As the clock ticked toward the start time, she fidgeted with the sleeve of her sweater, calculating both her excitement and fear. This was not just a meeting. It was her moment to challenge the status quo and advocate for a revolutionary approach to teaching. She envisioned standing before her peers, the projector illuminating her slides, as she shared her insights about the incredible capacity of mythology to connect with personal experiences. As anxious energy coursed through her, she recalled the student who articulated that battling anxiety during tests felt less terrifying next to a mythological hero like Thor. Moments like these fueled her resolve, but among the support were shadows of doubt that crept in like dark clouds that as the meeting began. She listened to her colleagues present their reports, their voices a tempting lullaby that threatened to drown her in self-doubt. They discussed curriculum standards and testing scores, totally oblivious to the deeper needs of the students. Each voice, mundane and structured, reinforced the rigidity of the system she wanted to transform. Emma's turn came, and she stood, heart pounding in her chest. Pausing just a moment longer than she intended, she gathered herself and stepped forward. The room's eyes settled on her, a mix of curiosity and skepticism ringing in the air. "Thank you for having me," she started, her voice steadier than she felt. As she began her presentation, she shared students' writings and performances, threading a narrative that explored how myths came alive within their personal stories. Pictures of smiling faces highlighted their engagement, while she told anecdotes of laughter, growth, and revelation. Mythology isn't just about ancient tales. It's a lens through which our students can understand their own realities. These stories are climbing tools, aiding them to scale their vulnerabilities. But just as she found momentum, an interruption cut through the room. Greg, a veteran teacher known for his traditional views, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and dismissed her idea with a scoff. "Are you suggesting we treat serious subjects like anxiety with some frivolous tales? This is a school, not a storytelling camp." Emma's heart raced. The biting words resonated within her, layering her vulnerability with anger. How could he reduce the transformative potential of mythology to mere frivolity? In that moment, she realized the battle was not just for her teaching style, but for a deeper understanding of what education should encompass. Drawing a deep breath, she confronted him directly. "But what you don't grasp is that stories can change lives. Thor faced down giants just as our students confront fears, and they're learning through those connections." She could feel a shift in the room as others leaned in. Some nodded. Eyes unfocused on their own papers finally looked up. The acknowledgement of struggle that echoed through her argument was palpable. Nevertheless, Greg wasn't finished. "We've gotten lost in a haze of creativity while our students struggle with basics." His words echoed painfully, a challenge that struck her core. Was she losing sight of academic rigor amidst her visionary pursuits? What was the balance between embracing creativity and adhering to core subjects? As the discussion swayed back and forth, Emma felt an internal storm brewing. She stood at a crossroads. Should she retreat or push further? She thought of her students, their passion fed by her daring approach, and felt the stirring drive to push back against the doubt. With newfound clarity, she understood it was not entirely a battle against Greg, but rather an invitation to redefine learning together. Finishing her presentation, she resolved to frame her findings as a proposal for collaboration rather than opposition, entailing a series of workshops merging creativity with rigorous content, an experiment that could push boundaries for all. In the aftermath, the decision to fight for this ideal buzzed in her mind. Would the faculty recognize this shift as an opportunity or see it as a threat? Emma left the meeting with a blend of anxiety and hope, her mind racing with plans for the workshops. Would her colleagues open their minds to this creative methodology? Or would they resist, hardening into their roles and clinging to outdated perceptions of what education should be? Emma's thoughts swirled like autumn leaves caught in a gust of wind as she walked away from the meeting. Disappointment and determination coiled within her, pulling her mind toward the next steps in her plan. Greg's skepticism echoed like an unwelcome refrain, yet beneath the sting lay a flicker of motivation. Transformative education wasn't simply a series of slides and anecdotes. It demanded an active engagement with her colleagues. In her classroom the next day, as she set up for her lesson, she pondered how to present her proposal in a way that would resonate more deeply. What if she invited her colleagues to experience the myths she cherished firsthand? Taking the classroom as a laboratory, she could craft experiences that demonstrated her theories. Emma began to jot down ideas, envisioning workshops where they would engage with mythological stories using drama, art, and discussions to dissect how these narratives could bridge the gap between creativity and academic rigor. But pushing forward meant risking vulnerability again. Would her colleagues embrace the idea, or would they remain entrenched in their doubts? And what of her own apprehensions about the backlash from Greg or other traditionalists? That gnawing uncertainty tugged at her gut. She had tasted courage once, yet the prospect of wielding it again felt daunting. To end the next faculty meeting, she decided to propose her initiative. The thought of standing before the group, both familiar and foreign, electrified her. Each colleague represented potential allies in her mission, but Greg's dismissive tone remained like an anchor weighing her down. She needed to prepare for resistance. She imagined his arms crossed and his skeptical glare aimed directly at her while she spoke. Taking a deep breath, Emma reflected on her students. They had inspired her to share this vision, and she couldn't fall back now. With a shaky resolve, she approached her principal, Sarah, after the meeting, seeking approval for the idea. I want to host workshops that incorporate mythology, demonstrating its relevance in a contemporary educational context, she explained. Sarah's brow furrowed, and Emma felt a pang of anxiety rise within. Interesting concept, Emma. But you know how some might view this. It's a departure from what we normally endorse. I understand, Emma replied, her voice strong. But it's time to challenge our students' engagement, offer them something that speaks to their experiences, that empowers them. I want to invite teachers to join in this journey, not just make it a solitary vision. She sensed the principal's hesitation, a well-founded concern about the potential pushback from other faculty members. Yet, Emma stood firm, bolstered by a newfound clarity. What if instead of viewing Greg or others as adversaries, she considered them potential collaborators? The idea of approaching the challenge as a dialogue made her mission feel less like a solitary crusade and more like an opening for shared growth. That evening, Emma sketched out a workshop outline. Each session would focus on a specific myth, layering its narrative with classroom applications and student discussions. She intended to weave in real-life scenarios that paralleled the lessons of courage, relationships, and challenges found within the stories. Conceived as a safe space, the workshops would honor each teacher's skepticism while inviting an exploration of how these writings could reconstruct their approach to education. As she finalized her notes, excitement flipped through her like a current. This could be her chance to create real change. Only time would reveal if her colleagues would welcome the experience or clench their jaws against it. Emma felt the weight of all she stood to lose, but the prospect of inspiring them just as her students had inspired her tasted sweeter. The next day, she gathered her courage and scheduled a meeting to propose the workshops to the faculty. Yet, as she stepped into the faculty lounge, she couldn't shake the question lingering in her mind. Would they see the opportunity, or would they choose to dismiss it? With her heart thudding, she prepared for the possibility of standing once more in the eye of the storm. The time had come to face the doubts not just of colleagues, but her own as well. Would she be able to rally her peers, or would they see her ideas as more than just fantasy? Emma's resolve solidified as she reminded herself this was only the beginning. The day of the proposal arrived, and the air in the faculty lounge crackled with anticipation. Emma stood before her colleagues, her proposal neatly organized and her thoughts flowing with clarity. Gone was the shaky uncertainty of the past. She was a different person now, confident and determined. She had spent so much time wrestling with self-doubt, but now, she was ready to confront the reality of her aspirations head-on. With each word she delivered, Emma felt a surge of empowerment. I believe that integrating mythology can provide our students with tools to navigate their challenges, she proclaimed, her voice steady against the backdrop of skeptics. These stories echo both fear and resilience, and our role is to help them connect these narratives with their own experiences. As she spoke, she could see the landscape of the room shift, some colleagues nodding slightly, intrigued by her unconventional approach. Questions arose, as she anticipated. But how will this align with our testing protocols? Greg challenged, leaning forward, arms crossed defensively. Instead of retreating into her uncertainties, Emma met his gaze. It will enhance analytical skills, offer a rich context for discussion, and instill empathy, things that standardized tests overlook, she countered. Emma's arguments resonated stronger than before. She highlighted specific student examples, further legitimizing her cause. Take Jake from my class, she explained. After engaging with Norse myths, he no longer viewed his anxiety as a hindrance. He felt empowered and performed better in his exams, proving that creativity fuels academic success. As colleagues leaned in, a sense of authenticity paved her platform. They were listening, truly listening. Emma's idea wasn't just theory. It was a beacon for real transformation within the educational landscape. Throughout her presentation, she noticed small reactions, a raised brow here, a quiet nod there that kept her momentum buoyant. Finally, Sarah chimed in. I appreciate your passion, Emma. Given the current academic climate, we have to approach this cautiously. Yet there was a glimmer of intrigue in her tone, a flicker of acknowledgement. Emma seized the moment. Let us start small, an after-school workshop where colleagues can explore these myths firsthand. Experience the enrichment before we evaluate its impact. As discussions circulated, she ventured further. Let us collaborate together. Each of us has unique perspectives. By weaving our strengths into this initiative, we can foster an environment that challenges and supports both personal and academic growth. The prospect of shared ownership transformed the atmosphere, and the seeds of collaboration slowly began to take root. Days turned into weeks, and the workshops unfolded beautifully. Emma witnessed her colleagues stepping out of their comfort zones, experimenting with creative methods, participating in discussions, and discovering connections between mythology and contemporary issues. Emma facilitated the dialogues, encouraging open critiques, and welcomed all voices, skeptics and advocates alike. Gradually, even Greg began to explore narratives through a different lens, though he still retained his cautious demeanor. The culminating workshop occurred during a final meeting where Emma presented data collected from student assessments, along with heartfelt testimonials. My grades improved, but the best part was feeling heard, a student had shared. It resonated with the faculty, showcasing growth rooted in engagement rather than just test scores. At the end of her presentation, Emma looked around the room. There were smiles, nods, and an invigorating conversation emanating from once skeptical faculty. She felt a sense of belonging and purpose unlike anything she experienced previously. Emma had not only challenged a system but also transformed herself in the process. She emerged as a leader among her peers. Before the meeting adjourned, an unexpected voice broke through the noise. It was Greg. Emma, he began, a hint of respect lacing his tone. I can appreciate the balance. You've struck between creativity and accountability. I'd be willing to collaborate on more of these archaeology of stories moving forward. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement, signaling a profound shift in their collective mindset. In that moment, Emma realized she had achieved more than she ever thought possible. She conquered her fears, proved her value, and established herself as a competent leader in a collaborative effort. The weight of invisible expectations had lifted, and as she stepped out of the meeting, there was a profound sense of fulfillment. She had not merely navigated her insecurities. She had transformed them into a rallying cry for progressive education. Emma stood at the crossroads of her aspirations and reality, filled with solid confidence. As she left the building, she felt the sun shining warmly on her face, an affirmation of her resolve to forge ahead, to continue sharing her story as a beacon for others. Challenging norms not only defined her career trajectory, it had become an intrinsic part of who she was. Now, she finally understood the value of her journey, a continuous cycle of learning and teaching, vulnerability and confidence, struggle and triumph. Emma had walked through the ashes of doubt and emerged, like a phoenix, reborn and empowered. She didn't just teach stories anymore. She lived them. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion.